hello. Buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. My name is General Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo. Sí. One and the same. En verdad, I tell you the truth, it is I. You do know who I am, do you not? If you don't, for shame. Because I am the most important man in the history of California. Sí. En verdad, it was I who was the first commercial grower of wine in your beloved Sonoma Valley wine country, and it was I who was military governor of this entire region of Alta California when it was part of the frontier of Mexico. And later, when it would become part of the US, I would still be a very important man. I served in the first California legislature. See? I also had a city named after me, the city of Vallejo, which you officially mispronounce today, vallejo. Ay, caramba. I also had a city named after my beloved wife, Francesca. Can any of you guess which very important city this is? Do I need to give you a hint? This very important city, named for my wife, Francesca, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Everyone says San Francisco. Because San Francisco is a very important city, and it does sound like my wife's name, but it's not true. However, there is a very interesting story behind this. You see, across the bay on the southern peninsula was once a tiny little fishing village called Yerba Buena. It had only 500 people because it's so cold and foggy that no one wants to live there. But then the gold rush came, and its population exploded to over 50,000, making it the largest city on the west coast of North America. So when I initially proposed to name my wife's city Francesca, as you would guess, they said, "Not so fast, Mr. Vallejo. We are now the most important city in the San Francisco Bay Area, and so we shall take the name San Francisco, and you and your wife can take a different name, and don't make it sound like ours." So I named her city Benicia, which was her middle name. But you see, this is where the city of Benicia got its name, and where the city of Vallejo got its name, and indirectly where the city of San Francisco got its name is because of me. Because I am such an important man. Sí. En verdad. And I am pleased to see how fascinated you all are with me. However, this is not the reason I am here, no. I am here for a much more important reason than this, which is to teach you about the most important part of the history of this state, which also just happens to be the story of my life. Not to brag. I will start with the beginning. As a young man graduating from the military academy in Monterey, which was then the capital of Alta California, I have already one foot in the history books, and the other in myth and legend. In fact, it is almost impossible for most experts to know where one ends and the other begins. And because I was such a bright student, my first assignment was to capture a rebel, a renegade, a traitor by the name of a Stanislaw. See, one and the same. You do know who is this Stanislaw, do you not? If you don't, for shame. Because Stanislaw was one of 4 historical figures behind the creation of one of the most famous legends in all the world. And as I describe him to you, you're probably going to recognize right away who he is. But if you do, I just ask one favor. Por favor, firme su boca. Or to put it more politely, silencio. Please do not say anything because I want to give everyone a chance to guess. Bien. Bien, it means I agree, like when you push the button on the internet. See, do not say anything. Gracias, muy amable. Stanislaw was a mestizo whose father was a Spanish soldier of noble Castilian blood and whose mother was an indigenous Yokut woman of the southern Central Valley. He was raised by the Franciscan brothers of the San Jose Mission, who take it from him both his Spanish name and his Indian name, and gave it him the name of Stanislaw for the patron saint of Poland. And seeing what a bright young man he was, they made him the alcalde, a leader among his newly converted people, training him in the arts of civic engagement and warfare. But when Stanislaw came of age, he had a kind of a Moses epiphany. And instead of taking on the reins of power, he organized his indigenous people into a rebellion against the mission system and the Mexican authority. And from the beginning of his revolution, he proved himself to be a very brilliant military tactician like me. And he was able to take half the villages and barrios and enclaves in this region without killing a single person until I arrived. And later, we found out how he did this. He had a second in command by the name of Yoscolo, an escapee of the nearby Santa Clara mission, who would wear a mask during the battles, and then between the battles he would remove his mask and spy behind enemy lines, disguised as a simple peasant who no one would ever suspect. And with this information, they were able to gain the element of surprise to have one successful campaign after another. And because also like me, Stanislaw was no coward, he would take responsibility for these actions, showing he had been there by drawing his sword and leaving his initial in the side of a tree or a fence post in the shape of an S. For Stanislaw, of course. Recuerde, firme su boca. And so, without the internet, where everything is always true and nothing is ever distorted, something of a myth and legend began to grow around these 2 men, to where there were no longer 2 men, but one, who wore a mask and carved his initial not in the shape of an S, but in the shape of a Z. Now you may say who it is. Yes, this is where the legend of Zorro came from, and this is where I come in. And with my small army, I have many fierce battles with the Stanislaw. But because of my sheer tenacity and having almost no backing from Mexico City, I would capture him and bring him to Monterrey to face the charge of treason, a crime which is punishable by death. And it was during this trial that there is a very heroic escape from the second-story courtroom window where Stanislaw landed perfectly and rolled off on a horse, just like in the movies. Notice I did not say he landed on a horse. I say he landed perfectly and rode off on a horse. He duck and roll like a paratrooper. And then he regrouped with his men and continued his revolution. And faded away into obscurity. Yes, it is true that almost no one remembers a Stanislaw anymore, unless you are from a Stanislaw county, or maybe you are a historian or a tour guide or something like this, but he is largely forgotten, which is kind of sad. Even for me, he's a sworn enemy. But Zorro, everyone remembers Zorro, one of the most portrayed characters in all of cinema, going all the way back to the days of a silent film. But I have yet to make my most important contribution of all. It would come many years later. At the end of my military career, late at night, lying in my pajamas next to my beloved Francesca Banisha, I will hear a loud knock at the door. And I know who it is. The early years of Mexico were a very uncertain time in our history. Having been bankrupted by a revolution from España, we had no money to pay soldiers to protect the outlying frontier. And already, Texas had broken away in the Lone Star Revolt, and we knew it was going to happen again soon. We just did not know where or when. And that night, it happened in front of my house. A ragtag group of 50 expatriatos of the United States called the Bear Flag Revolt, who would enter my property without a single shot fired in resistance. But I am not afraid of them. No. I make them wait for 10 minutes while I put on my uniform, because I am the general and I am in command. And then I would open the door and say to them, "You may now enter." And I would sit them down at my very large dining room table to brandy and to go over the terms of treaty and surrender. You see, I told you I'm a very smart man. I made sure that I did not negotiate with them until I knew that they are all good and drunk. And I would offer the perfect document to protect the interests of my fellow Californios. In it would say that they may remain and keep their land and simply pay taxes to a new government. And so this night was born the newly independent Bear Flag Republic of California, which would remain an autonomous nation for 21 days. Until the United States would arrive and claim it for itself, along with Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado and Nevada and Utah and Wyoming, and what they call the entire Southwest. And then we begin the Mexican-American War, which would last for 2 years, during which time they would honor my treaty. But at the end of the war came the discovery of gold in California. And soon after this came the beginning of the American Civil War. And so it was your President Lincoln, realizing he would have to take the gold from here to finance the war over there, who signed it into law the California Land Act, which said that the Californios may remain and keep their land, but only if they could show proper title going all the way back to the original Spanish land grants, which had been divided and subdivided for almost a century, and now 2 revolutions and 3 changes in government. And so for most people, this paper trail did not exist, and they were forced to leave. And for those whom it did exist, the cost of research and legal representation was so high that they were forced to sell their land and they had to leave. And then there were those few who did remain, like myself and my wife and our 2 daughters, who would one day marry the two sons of a Hungarian immigrant and fellow viticulturalist and winemaker like myself by the name of Count August Hazrathi. The same man who will later be called the father of California viticulture. My rightful title is stolen from me by a member of my own familia. And for this, I would die a very bitter man. And not just for this, no, but for the memory of my earliest accomplishments being buried with the memory of a Stanislaw and overshadowed by the memory of Zorro, a man who does not even exist. And for the single largest theft of land in the history of the world. And for the appropriation of my beloved wife's name for some cold, foggy, pic de mierda ciudad full of yuppies. And this would be the story of my life, were it not for just one more thing. Many years later, in the beginning of the silent film era, it is rumored that in the creation of the first Zorro movie, there is a very important supporting character based on me. He was the Commandant General of California, which I was. He was Zorro's best friend, which I was not. And he was the man searching for Zorro, hunting him down like a dog, but who had no idea of his true identity while his mask was off. And this, damas y caballeros, is the story of my life. Gracias por su atención. I bid you adios.